working to connect a region of over 600 cultural bridges between our lands.
Good evening, I'm Alma Angeles. You're watching ASEAN in Focus on tonight's headlines. President Marcos will visit Japan next week. The Philippines and Japan are set to sign 7 agreements covering different areas of cooperation.
Marcos Jr. will visit Japan for...
Myanmar's junta said the country had not returned to normalcy almost 2 years after its coup, casting doubt over plans for elections and ending a state of emergency. Alec Baldwin was formally charged with involuntary manslaughter over the accidental shooting of a cinematographer on the set of the low-budget Western Rust. And 20 personnel of the Tanay Bay 2nd Infantry Division were given various disaster response training by the 525th Engineer Combat Battalion on January 30. We'll hear more later. President Marcos will visit Japan next week. The Philippines and Japan are set to sign 7 agreements covering different areas of cooperation. Here's more.
Upon the invitation of Japan's Prime Minister Kishida Fumio, President Ferdinand R. Marcos Jr. will visit Japan for an official working visit on February 8 to 12, 2023. This will be the first visit of the President to Japan since taking office. He seeks to maximize the full potential of the Philippines-Japan strategic partnership in all its aspects and facilitate closer defense, security, political, economic, and people-to-people ties. During the visit, we anticipate the signing of 7 key bilateral documents or agreements covering cooperation in infrastructure development, defense, agriculture, and information and communications technology, areas that are in the President's priority agenda. The President will meet Japanese Prime Minister Kishida Fumio, his host, and it will be the second face-to-face meeting between the two heads of government in less than 5 months after their first meeting at the sidelines of the United Nations General Assembly in September last year. The bilateral meeting will be followed by a working dinner hosted by the Prime Minister. Both leaders will discuss a broad range of bilateral and regional issues to further strengthen the two countries' cooperation in the second decade of their strategic partnership. The President and the First Lady will also be given an imperial audience with Their Majesties Emperor Naruhito and Empress Masako at an unspecified date and time. Commensurate to the strong economic ties between the two countries, a large business delegation will be joining the President's trip. Roundtable and business meetings, business calls on the President, and a business seminar will be held on February 9 and 10. The President will also witness the signing of several business deals. In his commitment to enhance the global competitiveness of Filipino seafarers, the President will also be meeting with CEOs of Japanese shipping companies and associations to advance partnerships with Philippine stakeholders in maritime education and welfare programs for our seafarers.
Now, the President will depart Manila in the afternoon of February 8 and will arrive in Tokyo in the early evening of the same day. The Department of Foreign Affairs Assistant Secretary for Asian and Pacific Affairs, Neil Imperial, also said the case of Japanese fugitives, including the one known as Luffy, will not affect President Marcos Jr.'s official working visit to Japan. Again, let's listen in.
If there is a decision to deport these the concerned Japanese nationals, the Philippines will follow the timeline of deportation proceedings in accordance with Philippine laws. And we feel that this is totally unrelated to the visit of the President. Now, this is a consular matter being handled by the Department of Justice and the Japanese Embassy here, and our embassy in Japan with the Ministry of Justice of Japan in Tokyo. So we don't think it will affect in any way the visit of the President, and we do not expect it to be raised during his meeting with his counterpart.
An online report of Japan Today said Japanese burglary suspect Yuki Watanabe, alias Luffy, and his men are among the suspects in some 20 cases of theft and robbery in 14 prefectures in Japan since last year, including the murder-robbery of 90-year-old Kinuyo Oshio at home in Komei City, western Tokyo, on January 19, citing data from Japan's National Police Agency. Over 30 suspects have been arrested in connection with the crimes. Myanmar's junta on Tuesday said the country had not returned to normalcy almost 2 years after its coup, casting doubt over plans for elections and ending a state of emergency. Let's listen to the Human Rights Watch person, Phil Robertson.
Will be that if the Myanmar military junta moves forward with a so-called election, which is what they're talking about, I expect that will also fuel further violence, because the people who are contesting the election, particularly from the pro-military parties, will be seen by the PDFs as targets. The reality is that we will see violence. We will see the people of Myanmar unwilling to accept this. And when you have PDFs that are operating across the country and have the capacity to attack targets in the communities, I fully expect that they will make it ungovernable. They will make it impossible to hold the election in many of these areas. The reality is that this is a tug of war between the people of Myanmar and the military. And the military is using what it has, which is brute force, used indiscriminately to attack anything they think is a target. And that often means shelling villages, it means burning down villages, it means shooting civilians. I think using this law to try to clear the path for the USDP and or another political party that would be oriented towards the Myanmar military. This is all about Min Aung Hlaing, trying to find a way to get himself anointed as president. I think that there's a very real possibility that governments like Thailand and India might endorse this election. And if they do, they deserve all the brickbats and criticism that they'll get from the international community. The UN Secretary General said in the weeks after the military coup 2 years ago that this coup will not be allowed to stand, that this has to be resisted. And he's been backing off that position ever since. I think we have statements of solidarity. We have statements that are warning that the situation get much worse, but we're not seeing a lot of follow-through.
The Southeast Asian country has been in turmoil since the military toppled democracy figurehead Aung San Suu Kyi's civilian government, alleging massive fraud during elections her party won in 2020. A junta-imposed state of emergency is due to expire at the end of January, yesterday, after which the Constitution states that authorities must set in motion plans to hold fresh elections. A junta-stacked National Defense and Security Council met on Tuesday to discuss the state of the nation and concluded it hasn't returned to normalcy yet. The military's information team said in a statement, Junta Chief Min Aung Hlaing has previously said elections could only be held when the country was peaceful and stable. Under the military-authorized or a military-authored 2008 Constitution, the President, in coordination with the Defense and Security Council, can extend a state of emergency for 6 months upon a request from the head of the military. In a related news, the United States slapped fresh sanctions on Myanmar a day before the Southeast Asian country marks the second anniversary of the military coup that launched a violent campaign against democracy activists. Take a look. The U.S. Treasury placed sanctions on Myanmar Energy Minister Myo Mien-oo and the top 2 officials of the state-owned Myanmar oil and gas enterprise. It also placed sanctions on Myanmar Air Force Chief Chun Ang Lasway, a former military official that the the Treasury said provides arms to pro-regime militias M2 Thuy Thai Za, the daughter of Thai Za, a businessman whose large Tu group works closely with the Myanmar military. In addition, the Treasury sanctions the military-controlled Union Election Commission and two state-owned mining companies. The sanctions announced in parallel with similar actions by Canada and Britain came after Myanmar's junta cast doubt on its announced plan to hold new elections. Meanwhile, protesters gathered outside the Myanmar embassy in Bangkok on the second anniversary of the coup that toppled Aung San Suu Kyi's government. Take a look. Now, Western powers have already launched a fresh broadside of sanctions against the Myanmar generals on the anniversary, but previous rounds have shown little sign of throwing the junta off course. The United States, Canada, and Britain announced a new round of sanctions on the anniversary, targeting members of the junta and junta-backed entities. Myanmar's former colonial ruler, Britain, targeted, among others, companies supplying aviation fuel to the military and enabling its barbaric air raiding campaign in an attempt to maintaining power. Australia also announced its first sanctions aimed at 60 members of the junta responsible for, quote, egregious human rights abuses and two sprawling military-controlled conglomerates. U.S. sanctions also targeted the junta-approved election commission, which last week gave political parties 2 months to re-register in a sign the military appeared to be going for fresh polls. But with armed resistance raging across swathes of the country, analysts are saying people in many areas are unlikely to vote and run the risk of reprisals if they do. In tonight's other news, energy rationing, additional budget, tariff applications, and government borrowings are some of the solutions drawn up by the government to sustain the operations and ensure the continued delivery of power supply by the National Power Corporation, or NPC, in off-grid areas. In a news briefing, the Department of Energy, NPC, and the National Electrification Administration, or NEA, said they are working on short and medium-term measures as NPC faces this year a constraint in its corporate operating budget, which poses a major problem in sustaining its operations in off-grid areas. Let's listen in.
90s, ang shortage natin was capacity. Right? So we couldn't really predict kung kailan magkakaroon ng systems-wide blackout. Today, the shortage is fuel, which poses a different set of problem. Now, kung fuel, if I were to go back to the experience in the early 90s, kung sinabi sa akin noon na, okay, may brownout tayo ng 9 hours, but the brownout will be between 10 p.m. and 7 a.m., that's probably better than not knowing when the brownouts will be. And of course, the big issue is the funding deficit, right? There is fuel to be bought, but yung pambili ang problema. So, and I think si Odette has made the distinction between what's in the budget and available cash.
Yeah.
So sana, if we can work together to manage a rationing, right, it will be better for everybody. Of course, NPC will continue to do its best to garner additional funding.
In order to come up with short-term measures to address the operations and continued delivery of power supply to the off-grid areas. But this is a continuing challenge. As you know, the price of diesel in the international market has been on the uptick in the last week or so. And for the rest of the year, there are indications that unless, of course, there are economic developments in the global area, that the prices of diesel will remain high.
The NPC board and the DOE are working on effecting 5 billion peso borrowing by the NPC with government financial institutions. This will require special authority from the President. The DOE and NPC are also working with the Development Budget Coordination Committee to program funds that would support NPC's funding deficit for this year, which amounts to 14.205 billion pesos. The NPC has also identified reimbursements for the advances it made for the maintenance of the Bataan nuclear power plant from 2011 to 2023 in the amount of 367 million pesos. Other contingency measures being considered are immediate approval of tariff applications before the Energy Regulatory Commission. In other news, even before the onions are fully grown, a Philippine farmer named Luis Angeles races to harvest the crop and cash in on eye-watering prices for a vegetable that has become a luxury item in the country. Onion prices have soared in recent months, reaching as high as 800 pesos or $15 a kilogram in Manila supermarkets, making them more expensive than chicken or pork. Let's listen in.
So far sir, talaga itong nangyayaring farm gate price is talagang matatawag nating history sa buong Pilipinas talaga, hindi man sa buong Pilipinas, all year round na nagdaan. Ngayon lang kami nakaranas ng ganitong presyo. Takwan po, number 1 po yung ating farm inputs, fertilizer, yung presyo ng farm inputs. Kasi po, mataas ang farm inputs, ano nga asahan nyo sa amin? Ibebenta namin ng mababang presyo yung aming kalakal. Napakalaki po kasi ng puhunan, which is kailangan namin bawiin. Tapos andyan pa yung threats ng ulan na maaaring umubos sa aming mga sibuyas. Then may matitira kaming konti na anihin, papapasukin nyo naman yung imported, patong-patong na ho yung aming mga kalaban.
Binibiro ko na nga lang minsan, sabi ko amoy-amoyin na lang natin ang sibuyas. Kaya po minsan umuwi kami sa province, sabi ko, yung dating dinadaanan namin sa Nueva Ecija, sabi ko nagulat na nga lang ako kasi sako-sako noon na binibili, na talagang 1 kilo na lang ang medyo talagang nakakagulat talaga.
The aging farmers is not something we only observe in the Philippines. It's something we observe in Asia, right? And a sort of flip coin to that is that there are fewer younger people as well that are interested to actually engage in farming. It's not an attractive kind of work because you have a lot of challenges, right, in farming, and therefore you have a lot of the youth, moving out of farming. And when we go to the field and interview farmers for our research, that's also what they say. Why should I ask my children to farm when I don't get enough even from farming?
We always have the misconception that when the prices are high, these are purely due to the high production cost. But essentially, that is not the case in many countries, especially when there are challenges in moving the commodities from a particular area to another area. Of course, the farther, the more expensive, the more players involved, the more expensive. So this is where we have to be challenged on how to reduce them so that consumers will be paying a lower price.
While we are continuously monitoring the farm gate price, titingnan din po natin ang paggalaw ng presyo. Ngayon po, base sa ating monitoring sa mga palengke, meron na pong 300, 320, 380, wala na po kaming nakikitang 500 dun sa mga palengkeng minomonitor.
Meanwhile, the prevailing retail price of onions continued to drop on Friday as the imports arrive on schedule according to authorities. According to the Department of Agriculture, Bantay Presyo or Price Watch, the lowest price was recorded for local white onions, which are sold at 170 pesos per kilogram, with its highest cost at only 300 per kilogram. Imported white onions are set at 250 per kilogram to 260, higher than the local white onions, as the DA projected arrivals of imported volume have helped in the market price drop. It's not the first time the Philippines has experienced a shortage of a basic food staple that caused prices to spike. Sugar, salt, and rice have all been hit in the past. Poor yields, high costs, insufficient investment in irrigation and machinery, lack of access to cold storage facilities, and farm-to-farm roads, and crop-destroying typhoons have long impacted the sector. Pest outbreaks, as well as soaring oil and fertilizer prices since Russia invaded Ukraine last year, have only added to farmers' woes. Despite government pledges to boost domestic food production, the country relies heavily on imports to feed its growing population, but tariffs fuel inflation. In tonight's other news, Alec Baldwin was formally charged with involuntary manslaughter over the accidental shooting of a cinematographer on the set of the low-budget western Rust. Now, Baldwin was holding the Colt .45 during rehearsals for the film when it discharged, killing Helena Hutchins in October 2021. New Mexico 1st Judicial District Attorney Mary Carmack Altwis had already announced earlier this month that there was sufficient evidence to file criminal charges against the veteran U.S. actor. Today, we have taken another important step in securing justice for Helena Hutchins. Carmack Altwis said on Tuesday, in New Mexico, no one is above the law and justice will be served. In their statement of probable cause, investigators said Baldwin had been distracted and talking on his cell phone to his family during a firearms training session. He only attended training for around 30 minutes, even though the session was scheduled to run for at least an hour or more. They wrote, citing the film's armorer, Hannah Gutierrez-Reed. Now, Gutierrez-Reed, who was responsible for weapons on the set, was formally charged on Tuesday with the same crime as Baldwin. Now, if convicted, they face up to 18 months in prison and a $5,000 fine, but a firearm enhancement to the charge could take that sentence to 5 years. Former 30 Rock star Baldwin has repeatedly said he was told by the crew that the gun was not loaded and that he did not pull the trigger. Baldwin's attorney, Luke Nickas, has vowed to beat the charge, which he called a terrible miscarriage of justice.
Change out, take the clothes, and then he's going to follow a deputy back to the sheriff's office.
Oh my God, fuck. Are they okay?
Hey, Santa Fe, we need more units out here.
Huh?
I haven't been inside, I don't know.
God, oh my God, oh my God.
What's your job there with them?
I'm the armor, or at least I was.
I take the gun out in the rehearsal. He wanted very dramatic rehearsal.
20 personnel of the Tanay Bay 2nd Infantry Division were given various disaster response training by the 525th Engineer Combat Battalion on January 30. PA spokesperson Colonel Trinidad said the 20 personnel underwent lectures and practical exercises on basic incident command system, hazardous material awareness, emergency medical response, rope rescue techniques, and collapse structure search and rescue. The 525th Engineer Combat Battalion, also known as Mandirigtas, a combination of Mandirigma or warrior and Manliligtas or savior, is the PA's primary humanitarian assistance and disaster response unit. The training was held at the 2nd Infantry Division headquarters in Camp General Mateo, Kapinpin, Tanay Rizal. The PA and Japan's military forces in November 2021 conducted a 5-day field training exercise on disaster response, which aimed to enhance the capabilities of the PA and Japan Ground Self-Defense Force in humanitarian assistance and disaster relief, or HADR, response, such as collapse, structure, and water search and rescue. The HADR Coordination Project is in line with the two countries' bilateral initiative that began in 2019. As my usual habit, I'd like to end the day on a positive note. Let's encourage and build each other up so that no one is left behind. And that's it for tonight's broadcast of ASEAN in Focus. I'm Alma Angeles. Stay in the news because we live in extraordinary times. Good night.